and cigars if you'd like before an inspiring talk by an engaging Catholic speaker. Dress is coat and tie. Claritas's next gathering is Thursday, February 18th in downtown McKinney. If you know a committed Catholic man age 18 and over who may be interested in attending, have them reach out to Eric Bonenberger at 972-345-2538. That's 972-345-2538.
KATH 910 AM welcomes Five Diamond Service as a new sponsor. It's owned by Oscar Castañeda from St. Monica Catholic Church in Dallas. They're a family-owned and operated business. Oscar invites you to contact Five Diamond Service to see how they can help you with any residential, commercial, construction, and post-construction cleaning services. You can visit their website, fivediamondservice.com, or reach them via phone at 214-317-1055.
Thanks for listening to KATH 910 AM Frisco, Dallas, Fort Worth. Catholic radio for your soul in North Texas on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Heard also at grnonline.com and on your smartphone. Celebrating the culture of life. This is the Guadalupe Radio Network. Radio for your soul. Welcome to Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end, which is God Himself, our loving Father. And now, here's your host, Dave Palmer.
And good afternoon, good evening. I guess it's afternoon everywhere we are. And welcome to this edition of Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end. And as you can see, if you're watching on our social media platforms, a little bit of a different look today as far as my co-host. I'll tell you more about that in just a second. Today is Friday in the 5th week of Ordinary Time. We are a few days away from the beautiful season of Lent. I hope you're preparing for Ash Wednesday and what you're going to do, what you're going to give up, and all that good stuff. I also want to say, we're broadcasting across our entire English radio network. And this past, just earlier this week, on Tuesday morning? Yeah, Tuesday morning, we welcomed Bishop Joseph Strickland to studio. And we did a special live broadcast during the 8 o'clock Central Time hour with Bishop Strickland. And we welcomed our new affiliate in the Diocese of Tyler, KEES 1430 AM. And so if you're listening in Tyler, welcome, and we are so happy that you are part of the GRN family, okay? And this is a new show. We've been on for about a month or so. My name is Dave Palmer. I serve as executive director of the station here in North Texas. And Diane Xavier, thank God for Diane Xavier, because she is the one who knows all the technical aspects, how to get us onto social media and all that kind of good stuff. And so Diane is running the board, taking calls, and typically Sissel Anderson is my co-host, and Sissel's has the best excuse for being off today. Her dear father, Chuck, is getting married tomorrow. He's a widower, and he met a wonderful woman, and of course fell in love. And tomorrow they're getting married, and so Sissel, of course, and her sister and her brother are planning the rehearsal dinner and going to the rehearsal dinner tonight. And so she said, I can't be here on this date. I said, well, you got to find a substitute. You got to find somebody. And so we were trying to figure out who would be a good substitute for Sissel. And one thing you may not know if you're not in the Dallas area is that Sissel hosts a show once a month called Young and Present, which is focused on evangelizing young people. And she has a tremendous co-host by the name of Zach Barton. And Zach serves as the director of youth ministry at one of our local parishes here, St. Philip the Apostle in Louisville. And it's a great show. And the two of them are talking about evangelizing young people, 20s and 30s. And Zach is a young person himself. And he's here. And welcome, Zach.
I'm thankful to be here, brave the cold weather to be able to do so, but we're here.
Yeah. Now, all the people up north in Washington think we're wimps because down in Texas, cold is different than people up north. But it's, next Monday, it's going to drop down to like 0 here. I've never experienced a 0 temperature Fahrenheit.
I haven't either, and I'm not looking forward to taking my dog out first thing in the morning because he likes to mosey around, and so I feel like I need to layer up for that, but I'm not awake enough to put in that kind of effort.
If it does drop down to 0, I'm just going to go outside for like 1 minute and say, okay, this is what 0 feels like, and then I'm going back inside.
Right.
But welcome to you, and again, all the best wishes for Sissel and her family today, and Chuck and his soon-to-be bride, and I hope they have a glorious weekend, albeit quite cold. And I also want to mention that typically we have our wonderful intern high school student, Jonathan von Weber-Hansberg. He is out today because of the weather. He lives pretty far away. It's a big sacrifice for him and his parents to get him here every Friday, but it was just a little too treacherous out there today. So we're going to welcome him back, God willing, next Friday. And so I'm doing the social media stuff. And so if I seem a little distracted, that's why. I'm doing double duty today. But before I get into it, let me also mention that this show is based on the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas and his Summa Theologia. I picked it up about 10 years ago. Absolutely fundamentally changed my life. I see the whole world differently because of St. Thomas Aquinas, and like all good things, goodness is self-diffusive. That's actually one of the teachings of Aquinas, is that goodness is by its very nature wants to spread itself, and God is goodness, and God wants to spread his goodness to the world. And I immediately said, I don't want to keep this to myself. I want to teach it. And so I started teaching high school kids. I taught it at my parish. Any opportunity I had to teach the Summa, and then the opportunity came to do it on the radio. So it's a great delight to do that. I want to say also, another first for this program, during the third segment today, we are going to have our first ever phone guest, like a real guest. And his name is John Cuddeback. And he wrote a book called True Friendship, where virtue becomes happiness. And he has based it on Aristotle and Aquinas.
Wow.
And of course, we're going to kind of focus in on Aquinas, and especially during this age of social distancing, and everybody's being encouraged to stay away from each other and not gather. And I think it's a timely topic.
I do.
About friendship, and what that means in the age of coronavirus and lockdowns and all that. So that should be kind of fun. He'll be on the phone with us. Also, in the second segment, I've got 2 copies of his book to give away. And so if you're one of the first 2 people in the second segment to call in and ask a question or comment about the topic that we're talking about, I'll give you one of those books, thanks to Carmel Communication. Okay, so first segment I teach, second segment Zach and I discuss what I talked about. Third segment we'll have our guest. But I do want to know more about you, and your early 20s, you're married.
Yep.
Obviously take your faith seriously. Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, so I grew up in a little town called Seymour, Texas, which, if you've never heard of that, that's A-OK, because 95% of people haven't, if not more. So it's a small little town in north central Texas, and to where my family group's Cradle Catholics, to where graduating high school, I thought I wanted to make a lot of money. Okay, obviously, being in a youth ministry, you don't make a lot of money, so something changed. I went to Hardin-Simmons University for 1 year. I had a brother who coached football for the university for 13. Now he's in the seminary, so he changed paths as well. But after about a year, I thought God might be calling me to a little something more. I didn't know if that was priesthood, married life, what it was, and so I decided to step away from Hardin-Simmons. I entered into a time of private discernment, never public, never entered the seminary, but I got a spiritual director. And during the meantime, I thought, well, if I'm trying to figure this out, might as well go study something in school. And I thought, well, theology might be the best thing to do. And the next closest Catholic university to where Seymour is the University of Dallas, right down the road from where we are today. So really got there and got immersed in the faith, and really enjoyed learning, and even learned some of Thomas Aquinas. I know we'll talk about that here in a minute. But all of a sudden, my phone went off one day, and it was from Father Raymond McDaniel, who's the pastor of St. Philip the Apostle in Louisville, and he said, hey, there's a job opening here as just a little part-time youth ministry assistant. If you'd like to come up and interview for it, great. If not, don't worry about it. And I thought, well, what the heck? I didn't know what youth ministry was, and so I said, well, I think that might sound kind of good, something good that I could do with myself while I'm in college. And so I did that all throughout my time, my 3 years at UD, and then as I graduated, thank God, doors opened up right at the right time and was able to enter into it full time. And so I've been doing that ever since.
That's awesome. I mentioned I teach high school students the Summa, and I want to know your experience, because I think a lot of people underestimate the ability that young people, teenagers, are able to grasp the faith, understand the faith. And I've got teenage students that really understand this stuff and can spit it right back at me and say, okay, they can understand deep philosophy. Is that your experience? That if you just teach them, they'll get it for the most part.
What's interesting that you say that is oftentimes I have a tendency of this myself of shying away from topics like that, especially with Aquinas, because you hear he's heady, he's really deep, which he is. Don't get me wrong, but kids are studying things like physics and calculus and these high sciences in school at a young age, and so they can't handle it. But it's one of those deals. What I found, what helps the most, is when you really get them engaged in a conversation and really ask questions that are open-ended, and you start to see them hit a deeper level over a period of time.
Yeah.
And so they do have that capability. You just have to help them to be able to see it.
Yeah, very good. And real quickly, I want to ask you, again, Zach Barton here in studio with me, because Sissel is out planning for her father's wedding tomorrow. How much Thomas Aquinas have you studied? You went to UD, so I know there's a lot of it there. I was interested in hearing a moment ago that your very thesis had to do, I don't know if it was directly Thomistic, but it certainly has to do with what I talk about a lot on this show. So how much digging into Thomas have you done?
So I've done a little bit of digging into Aquinas primarily through my philosophy classes and also some of my theology as well, especially when it came to Thomas's understanding of the Trinity and the existence of God and those types of things. So I have read parts of the Summa, not all of it. Heavens knows that would take me.
You haven't read the whole thing?
No.
Get out of here,
I've only got one lifetime, and so I try to spread my reading around. So I have had a little bit of him. My thesis, though, at the University of Dallas, as a theology major, you have to write a senior thesis. And so it wasn't directly related to Aquinas, but it had the idea talking about, you and I were, before the show, speaking on like the beauty of a sunset, and and how that helps to draw us back to God, in some way see the Creator in that. And so my thesis was over divinization or theosis in the eastern side there, to where we participate in those perfections of God, particularly by the virtues and in a higher form, the sacraments. And in some way, we start to become like God. We don't become God himself, but like God.
Yeah, deified. I mean, Thomas uses, of course, he's writing in Latin, but the term deified, where, what is it? Thomas or Augustine said man became God so that man could become God.
I believe that was Augustine.
Augustine said that, yeah. So, all right, well, welcome. You're already getting some comments. Sissel wants to know where your hat is.
Oh, Sissel.
His hat looks like headphones.
Well, actually, that's Sissel's problem there, because before I left, we did our radio show this morning, Sissel and I. She said she was going to get me a hat out of her car, so that's on you.
All right. The other thing I want to mention is if you are able to go to our social media platforms, go to Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, and comment, because what makes this program hopefully interesting to you is not just me talking, although I'm going to do a lot of talking in this first segment, but it's your interaction. We want to know, what do you think? Zach obviously is going to have a lot of input, and he's a very bright guy, and he'll be talking about what the lessons that we learned from the Summa, but we want to hear from you as well. Don't think that you have to have a degree or any expertise in this, even if you just call in and say, you know what, I didn't understand that. We had a dear Evelyn call in last week, 96 years old, down in Houston, listening, and she said, she wanted to talk about the attributes of God. And so just by way of a little bit of review, and if you do go to our social media platforms, you'll see that I have a PowerPoint presentation that is up. So I'm going to click over to that. Last week, we started on the attributes of God. And I just want to say, first off, that my goal in this show, this program, especially as we talk about the attributes of God, is not for you to walk away and say, you know what, I got it. Yeah. I totally understand God. I mean, this is like, we don't even understand our spouses.
Right.
We don't understand our friends. And that's not an insult to our spouses. People are complicated. We're all, complicated. And so what I really would like you to take away from this program is to be able, like Zach was kind of alluding to, is to see the world, your everyday life experience. For example, today in North Texas, it's in the 20s. Yep. Okay. Last week at this time, it was probably in the 50s. That's a change. Okay. So you recognize there's a change in the weather. And if the thought pops into your mind, if only briefly, that, you know what, that's a change, but God doesn't change. That's one of the attributes we're going to learn about today. If only that there you just thought about God. If you see a rabbit running across your yard and you say, wow, that's like a physical, tangible creature, and then you say, I remember on that show that part of God's simplicity is that he doesn't have a body.
Mm-hmm.
You just thought about God, okay?
Yeah.
So a lot of what we know about God is through negation. It's like, God isn't this. God doesn't change. And if you find yourself using your everyday experience to contemplate God, then this show has been a success. Okay, not that you say, you know what, I got it. I like totally got it. Like you figure out an algebra formula.
Yeah.
That's not what God is.
And I think the good thing about that is, Dave, is it gives people a language and a framework to operate in. Because oftentimes we experience something, but we can't put it into words. And so by doing so, you then have a way to be able to think about how this relates to our faith and even to God himself.
Yes, exactly. And if you want to call in, especially during the second segment, call us 877-757-9424. 877-757-9424. Call up. Diane will take the call. First two people to call in during the second segment get a copy of the book on friendship by our guest, Dr. Cutterback, who we'll talk to a moment ago. All right, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the 5 proofs for the existence of God. If you weren't listening then, I'm not going to go over them in a lot of detail, but I do want to encourage you to memorize these. You know, I teach CCD at my parish, and I tell them they got to memorize certain things. You really should memorize the 10 Commandments. You should memorize the virtues. You should the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Some of these things you need to. But nowadays, with such a problem with so much atheism in the world, I think we have to be able to be prepared to say, at least I understand roughly the 5 proofs of the existence of God through motion, cause, possibility, necessity, perfection, and intelligence. But again, we're not going to go through a whole lot of that today, but it does keep coming back. The attributes of God, I'm going to real quickly go through the 3 that we talked about last week, and then we're going to do the final 4. I mentioned when St. Thomas Aquinas was 6 years old, he amazed his teachers by asking, what is God? You know, and they're like, wow, this guy's got a bright brain for a 6-year-old. What is God? Not just who is God, but what is God? Okay, now we're talking about the qualities of God. And all right, the first one we mentioned is God's simplicity. Okay, now this is a little bit of review, and basically God is simple. And I mentioned last week it's really hard to talk about God's simplicity because it's complicated, not because God is complicated. He's perfectly simple, but we are not able to learn it. It's like teaching a dog algebra or geometry. They can't get it. It's beyond them, right? God has no body. Okay, now this was the real clincher, and you probably are familiar with this, is that with God, what he is the same as who he is and that he is, his nature, his essence, his intelligence, his will, his being, it's all the same.
Yeah.
Okay, can we get our head around that? Probably not, but it's pretty cool to think about, isn't it?
No, it's extremely cool, and I think that's so important today when we're talking about who God is. Because, you know, Bishop Robert Barron talks about this all the time. He's not one being or like the super being out there, but like what he is also who he is.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the things that blew me away when I first studied the Summa. I was like, God is existence?
Yeah.
I mean, whoa, that's pretty heavy. God is not a combination. He's not matter and form. He's not a body. He's not, you know, you can't move him. You can't change him. He has no potentiality. He's pure act, okay? The second attribute is God is perfect. And the best way I try to explain this is that in the second article, the 4th question of the Summa, Thomas says, are the perfections of all things in God?
Wow.
And he says, yes. Okay, so all I'm going to say is that when you experience perfection, okay, a beautiful sunset, a beautiful sunrise, a beautiful spouse, a beautiful something like that was the perfect football game. That was the perfect hot fudge sundae. That is participating in the perfection of God. Okay,
Wow.
Again, our everyday life experience, all perfections pre-existing God. So I know it sounds weird, and it almost sounds heretical to say, you know, God's like a hot fudge sundae, but there's goodness in that hot fudge sundae, okay? Another kind of mind-blowing thing from the Summa, Thomas says, is there really a difference between goodness and being? And he says, not really, okay, because anything that God creates is good, right?
Yeah.
The spider, the scorpion, the rattlesnake. They're good, okay? Because they have some, people are like, what? All right, is every being good? Yes, every being is good. So we are literally surrounded by goodness. God is goodness.
Yeah.
So every single life experience that we have should remind us somehow of God, right?
Absolutely incredible.
Okay, so it's pretty cool, okay? So does goodness have an aspect of a final cause? Yes. God is our end. Every single good thing that we experience in life is leading us in some way to God. This has to do with theology, which we talked about in the first show. Okay, so God is good, and all goodness preexists in him, okay? Now we're going to move on to the final ones. And I know I'm going a little late in this segment, Diane, so I'm sorry, but I'm going to try to get through these quickly. God is infinite, all right? So when I say God is infinite, first thing that pops into your mind, well, what does that mean to you?
If I am the normal average Joe out there, I'm thinking of the universe to where like it just goes on and on, like Star Wars in the opening credits. They just kind of go out there.
Okay. Yeah, it has to do with space and God not limited in space. Okay, so I've got on the screen, if you're looking at the PowerPoint presentation, I got a picture of a bird. Okay, a bird is made of matter and form, right? The matter is the feathers and the beak and the everything about that you can touch and see and in some cases taste, because we do eat some birds, right?
Yep.
The form is birdness. It's what it is, but it's not the same thing, right? But that bird in its nature are not the same thing. But interestingly, I don't know if you study maybe much about angels. Thomas teaches that an angel is in a place, right? An angel is not just everywhere. And so an angel cannot be in New York City and Paris at the same time.
Right.
Okay. But God can. Okay. So God has no spatial limitations.
Right.
He's just everywhere. Okay. Because he's existence.
Wow,
You
interesting.
follow that?
Yeah, I do follow that. I've never heard that actually before in all of my classes. So
Is that
nothing,
right?
nothing against you, D here. I just haven't heard that aspect of it. Yeah,
Yeah. Maybe you were sick that day when they taught it, right?
that's what we'll say.
I'm trying to give UD a pass.
Flicking paper,
okay?
the little paper footballs.
Okay, so again, he's everywhere, right? But then Thomas goes on to say, okay, is he everywhere? Is he in all things? Okay, is God, is God in that tree? Is God in that rabbit? No, he's not in all things, but he's not as part of their essence, but he's holding it into existence, okay? And so that thing exists because God is holding it in existence. All right, God is immutable. He does not change. The 9th question of the Summa, everything in our life changes, okay? The weather, as I said, changes. We change, okay? You look different than you did today. You certainly look different than you did 10 years ago, right? Our voices change. Our looks change. The weather, when you go out and see traffic, it's constantly changing, okay? I remember I used to jog around my block, and I'd notice just in the 3 or 4 minutes in my laps, the person out there gardening was no longer there. That bird I saw, I mean, constant change. Our whole life has changed, right? But God doesn't change. He's perfectly unchangeable. It's hard for us to get our head around it, right?
Yeah, it is hard to get around. And we can talk about that a little more in later, because the beauty of God being unchangeable, immutable, I guess is the fancy word to use, is very important to us. And so I look forward to picking your brain about that here in just a minute.
Let's we'll have an open discussion about that. And again, we want your comments either on social media or by calling. The first 2 people to call in are going to get a copy of the book on St. Thomas and friendship, which is very, very key. I'm looking forward to speaking to our guest about that. 877-757-9424. All right, God is eternal. Again, hard to get our head around. I got some pictures up here on the screen. Our whole life is based on time. This show started at 4 o'clock Central. Okay, Zach got here. He couldn't just come anytime. He had to be here before the show started. All right. Think about the sports that everything is based on time. A football game has 4 15-minute quarters. We're looking at the clock at work to see if it's 5 o'clock yet. Everything is based on time. Time, immutability, and eternity are very, very much related because time is a measure of before and after, okay? Time is a measure of movement. Everything that moves is inside of time, and so you have to say God is outside of that. There's no time.
Right.
And again, if that confuses you, well, welcome to the human race because we're inside time. Our whole world is time. But to just say, the fact that God is outside time, I may not understand it. I'm not living in an eternal type of world right now. but let it blow you away a little bit, right? Final one is God is one. Okay, now here's the, and again, hopefully this will be understandable. I got a picture of a dog on the screen, okay? This is one individual dog. Do you have a dog?
I do. Copper, we actually just took him to the vet, so that's why I was almost late getting here.
Okay. But your dog has a nature, which is kind of dogness, right? Which he shares with all the other dogs of the world. But is it Copper is his name?
Copper, yep.
Okay, so Copper is unrepeatable.
Yep.
There will never be another Copper in the world. But his nature is repeatable, okay? Because all the dogs in the world share his nature, just like you and I, we share a nature. But there'll never be another Zach Barton. There'll never be another Dave Palmer, right? But again, if you keep in mind that with God, his nature and his suppositum is the fancy word, his, his oneness, it's all the same thing.
Right.
And so our nature is repeatable and communicable. A lot of people share our nature, but no, they don't share what's unique about ourselves.
Right.
But with God, nobody shares his nature, right?
Right, and imagine for a lot of people, and if you haven't put this in the comment box, it's like if God is one, then how is he also three? That's a mind-blowing thing to be able to think about there.
Yeah, that's Trinitarian, and you maybe will come back for that show. That's going to be a whole different show, but that thing, three persons, one nature, that's interesting. All right, so a couple other things about the unity or oneness of God is that Thomas says that if there were two gods, one of them would have to be a little bit different than the other, and therefore one would have to be a little bit better. Because if they're exactly the same, then there's only one, right?
Right.
But one of them would have to lack a little bit of perfection.
Right.
And then one would be a little less perfect than the other. The other thing he says, and this will be my last point, we'll have a lot of time to discuss this, is he says, and let me just read this, he says, the unity of God is shown for all things that exist are seen to be ordered to each other, since some serve others. But things that are diverse do not harmonize in the same order unless they are ordered thereto by one. We live in an ordered world.
Yes.
The planets revolve around the sun. We've got the water cycle. We've got the photosynthesis cycle, the composting, all these things that just are perfectly ordered and beautiful. And Thomas is saying there can't be like several, there's not a committee working this out.
Right.
There's one being that's working everything. And so, again, all these things, again, we don't want to we can't fully understand it, but if it changes the way you see the world, then you are becoming a Thomist before your very eyes, okay? Hopefully this makes some sense. We're going to come back and discuss this. Put your comments on social media and call us up. The first two people are going to get a book, 877-757-9424. We'll be back.
We'll be back with more of Back to the Father after this. Please join the conversation by calling 877-757-9424 or join us on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter.
Your Odyssey begins at the University of Dallas, the premier Catholic liberal arts university in Texas. With campuses in Irving and Italy, UD's rigorous core curriculum sets it apart. An education rooted in the great works of Catholic and Western tradition. An education that ennobles and enables students in the pursuit of wisdom, truth, and virtue. Undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs are available. Start your college odyssey at the University of Dallas today. Go to udallas.edu to learn more.
Anne is a real GRN listener, so to help tell her story, we hired Open Line Monday host John Martinoni.
I love listening to Catholic radio on the GRN.
Anne is a smart girl.
And when I found out that GRN was raffling off a 2021 Mercedes-Benz GLA 250, I was like, where do I sign up?
Getting even smarter.
So I went to grnonline.com and bought 5 tickets for $100.
That's a steal.
Celebrity voice impersonated. Drawing ends March 1st.
I don't know why I turned on my radio, because I've kept my radio off for years, because there's so much trash. And once I turned it on, I was absolutely hooked. I actually was gone from the Catholic Church for 35 years. I want to get to heaven. I don't know if I will. I worry about it, But I not only want to get to heaven at the moment of my death, I want to find as much heaven as possible here on earth. I love the shows with a Catholic apologist. I love the shows with the sort of day-to-day psychologist, Greg and Lisa Popchak. I love hearing not just of other people's problems who call in, but I love getting the Catholic take on how to deal with day-to-day reality. If your purpose in life is to find God, not just here, but after you die, then living out that purpose is going to color absolutely everything you do.
The Guadalupe Radio Network, radio for your soul. Welcome back to the Father. To join the conversation, call 877-757-9424. And please join us on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter.
All right, we are back. This is Back to the Father. Thank you so much for listening and digging into the Summa Theologia. Again, like I said at the beginning, the goal here is not to understand this all and say, I got it. Okay, our whole life is a journey of trying to understand and better, get closer to God. My name is Dave Palmer, and don't forget, the first two people to call in during this segment and ask a question or make a comment, and don't worry about it. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to have a PhD in philosophy, because I don't, to call in and just ask a comment or a question. We'd love to hear from you. 877-757-9424. First two people are going to get the book called True Friendship, Where Virtue Becomes Happiness by Dr. John Cuddeback, who's going to be the guest in the third segment. So thanks so much. First two people, we'll try to put you on as quickly as possible on the air. In studio with me is Zach Barton, and Zach, take it away. Any comments or insights from the first segment?
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit more about God's immutability. For whatever reason, that's been on my mind today when I heard the topic is about the attributes of God. And so, Dave, if someone were, say you're in your CCD class, and someone walks up to you and you're teaching them this and says, Mr. Palmer, I guess if that's what they call you, why is it important that God is immutable? What kind of answer would you provide to that student?
Well, it's important because if he wasn't immutable, then he would change.
Yeah.
And then God could not be the first mover. Yeah. He could not be the unmoved mover. And he would be more like us. Yeah. And, God has to have certain qualities, like we learned about the first the proof for the existence of God, which was the first mover. We know things move, but there had to have been something at the beginning that got it all going in the first place that wasn't moved himself. And so if you make him movable all the way, all of a sudden he's changeable. Yeah. And he isn't quite as impressive.
That's true.
I guess than he is if he because if we could change him, I mean, I could change you. I could maybe change your mind. You could change mine. I could, push you but I don't want to be able to do that to God, because God is so much higher than me.
Yeah, I think that's great. I don't know how exactly I would answer that question just right on the spot either. But one of the things that comes to mind with God's immutability is just thinking about how our world works. You said a while ago it has order. I cannot imagine a world, all right, because God designed everything with order, to where like the boiling point of water varies every day. So like one day it's 212 in Fahrenheit, the other next day it's 150, the next day it's 280. You wouldn't be able to know anything. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about God, is that as he reveals himself throughout the Old Testament and in the person of Jesus Christ, if God is immutable, then that message that we get through our Lord never changes. So although we may change, the God who is justice but also mercy is always there and is never going to change to welcome us back home.
Yeah,
that's a mind-blowing thing, because as a kid growing up, the most worrisome and cumbersome thing, I think, was when you did something wrong and you knew it, but you did not know how mom or dad was going to react.
Yeah,
you didn't know if they were going to react lovingly or if they were going to whop you, one of the two. And so, but we know how God is, and so we can approach, especially as Catholics, the sacrament of reconciliation, expecting that mercy.
Yeah. And I think, to tie in current events, I think that's one of the things where some of the movements in our culture today to say, we don't know if you're a boy or a girl, and it's changeable. And any 5-year-old would say this is nonsense, because we want order. Yeah, I remember when I was a high school teacher, one of the first bits of advice I got from the more experienced teachers is they say, you may think the kids want a crazy and wild classroom where, every day is different and they don't know what to expect, but they don't. They want order. They want predictability. They want something that they know what they're going to get from day to day. Kids want that. Students want that. And we expect that. And I think that's a great example because we don't want to have to guess the freezing point, or is 2 + 2 still 4? But that's what I think one of the diabolical elements in our culture today. And I think it's an attack against God, is to take objective truth and turn it upside down and say there's really nothing that we really know is true. That's why every single night I cozy up to my Summa and I just say, Thomas, give me some order here.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a great point. And
Anne from Fort Worth called and said she really enjoyed your show, is enjoying the show.
Oh, thank you.
So just want to let you know. And then we have some a comment on social media if you want to read it, Dave.
Yeah. Is this the one from Candace?
Yes.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, Candace, I love the way she starts. She says, warning, possible stupid question. And I'll tell you, not only is it not a stupid question, but Zach and I were talking about this during the break, and we're like, I don't know if I can answer this. It's very deep, and Candace, I might have to claim ignorance on this. We'll talk a little bit about it, but Candace says the cause of God is within himself. Now, that in and of itself is a provocative statement. Is God's cause within himself? Because, God doesn't, well, first of all, God doesn't have a cause. God is uncaused.
Yep.
Okay, and he's the cause of everything. So that's true. Does that mean that identity politics is an attempt to overthrow, replace God, and define our own causes within ourselves instead of within God? And that is really an interesting question. Like I said, I don't know, because identity politics, from what I understand, it is rather than, I'm a son or daughter of God. I'm a human being in my nature. I'm precious in the eyes of God. Identity politics would be, I'm a white man. I'm a black man. I'm a gay person. That this is my identity, and I identify as a certain aspect of myself rather than who I really am as a child of God. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that?
No, I don't, because I'm not real familiar with identity politics. And so that's the big hang up for me. And so I want to claim a little bit of ignorance with you, Dave. But there is a little bit of something to what she's saying there, though, because oftentimes you're right in saying when people experience homosexual attraction or whatever it may be, people often identify themselves with that. But it's always important to remember what you are first, especially by virtue of your baptism, which is son or daughter of God, and that attraction does not define you.
Yeah, and I think she's onto something because, we're defined by God. God, it's, you could, look at a refrigerator and say it's an aardvark, but, it has an identity because of, and Thomas gets into this, because of the one who created it. Basically stamps, if I draw a picture, it is what I wanted it to be because I'm its creator. I'm the artificer, as he calls it. God creates all things, and so he is able to label them as they are. And I think what Candace is getting at, and Candace, you're very free to respond back and say, no, you guys are totally off track. I think if I identify myself solely by my own identification, then I am usurping God's authority and saying, rather than saying I'm a precious child of God. No, I'm this or I'm that, and I want to define myself. Or in a worst case scenario, I want to say I'm a woman. I'm not a man. That's definitely taking the place of God because that's not the way God created us.
And I think as human beings, we often do this in very subtle ways, whether it's identity politics or just in our own life and how we act. Because if you look back to the Genesis, the first sin of man is pride, of usurping that power of God. And so you see this in today of how we use technology and how, if you see this kind of in the Enlightenment period, to where they're trying to cure the effects of the fall. Of illness, of pain, of suffering, all those things. And so we're, in a way, trying to take that over.
Yeah. All right. We had the one call from the lady who called in and said she likes the show, but we want you to get on the air. Diane just said we have 3 minutes until we take our break and go to our guest. If you would like to get a copy of the book by Dr. John Cuddeback called True Friendship, Where Virtue Becomes Happiness. He's basing it on Aristotelian philosophy, St. Thomas Aquinas, so we'll talk to him about that. Call us up right now. You don't have to say anything amazingly profound. Just let us know you're out there, and we'd love to give you one of these books, 877-757-9424, 877-757-9424. And I do want to just say also, just to kind of reiterate something I said earlier, as we think about the attributes of God, and that's another thing I think would be kind of nice to commit to memory. What is God? Who is God? What are his attributes? The only way we really can understand them is through our lived experience. When you see something in motion, say, God is out. God's immovable. He's immutable. He doesn't move. When you look at your watch the next time, say, God is eternal. There is no time. Even if you don't fully understand it, at least say, what does that mean? Take it to adoration. Take it to prayer. God, help me to understand this, right? God is simple. He doesn't have a body. What does that mean? Well, angels don't have bodies either. Well, that's why I think angels help us to understand God, because they're creatures that are in many ways more like God than even us, right?
Yeah. And, one of the last ones that I really kind of want to comment on, Dave, is going to be the aspect of unity, or the attribute of unity. Because, if God is one, you really start to see that aspect that we say in the Creed every Sunday: one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. Because it points to what you and I were created for, which is communion, which is being in perfect union with God. And so that oneness that God has, he also calls us to in a very special way.
Yeah, very good. All right, let's go to the phone line. It's funny, people are calling in. Diane's processing the call, and I don't know if they're getting cold feet or not. Please, by all means, just ask the question, comment. We love to hear from you. I know this can be kind of deep stuff, but if you enjoy it and you think it's kind of fun to talk about this stuff, let's go to Michael calling from San Antonio, I presume listening to 89.7 FM. Michael, thanks for calling in. Appreciate you calling in to Back to the Father. What's your comment or question?
My question would be, how does, I guess, Aristotle or the Greeks define happiness as compared to our culture today, and how that ties into friendship?
Well, that's a great question, probably best answered by our guest in the next segment. So, Michael, if you don't mind me punting until the guest is on, because we actually have him on the line, I promise you we will answer that question in the next segment. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. And, Diane, do I need to put him on hold, or do you have his information? Okay. So, why don't you go ahead and hang up, Diane? Hang on. Okay, no, put him on hold. Okay. All right, 877-757-9424. Michael, thanks for the question. Glad you're listening there in San Antonio. Again, if you have any question or comment, we have one more of Dr. Cuddeback's book to give away during the next segment. Call us up and ask a question either now or then. But it is time for us to take another break. And then when we come back, we're going to continue with Zach Barton. Really appreciate the comments. Thanks, Zach. You've been a great addition to the program today. Dr. Cuddeback's book is called True Friendship, Where Virtue Becomes Happiness. This is Back to the Father, talking about the journey of life, focused on our final end, which is our Heavenly Father. And that should make you amazingly happy to know that our loving Father, like the prodigal son's father, just waiting for him, mercy, goodness, kindness. And so as we talk about God's attributes, that's who's drawing us back. That's our destiny if we are so blessed to get to heaven one day and enjoy beatitude. All right, can we take a break, Diane? Okay, take a break from Back to the Father. We'll be right back with Dr. Cuddeback after this.
The universe is filled with order from top to bottom. And it's a beautiful order, and not only is it beautiful, it's order that we can actually comprehend. And it's almost as if we have been made to be able to comprehend that order in the universe, to be able to contemplate it, so that we can see maybe that purpose behind it.
Please visit Father Spitzer's website, magicenter.com, to watch this beautiful and important video about purpose and God's creation. That's magiscenter.com.
Instead of fighting the crowds, isn't it so much easier to hop online and do your shopping in the comfort of your own home? Did you know that you can help the Guadalupe Radio Network when you shop online? All you need to do is shop on Amazon Smile, and 0.5% of your purchase goes to the GRN. Just go to amazonsmile.com and select La Promesa Foundation as your nonprofit of choice. La Promesa is the parent company of Guadalupe Radio. It's that simple to give a little extra help to the Guadalupe Radio Network.
It's more than a landmark of Corpus Christi, Texas. The chapel's 75-foot blue dome is adorned with gold stars representing Our Lady of Guadalupe and the star of the new evangelization. Hi, this is Len Oswald, president of the Guadalupe Radio Network, with another GRN Family Minute. Our Lady of Corpus Christi shines like a beacon to all who pass by. Sitting on the campus of a Roman Catholic retreat center whose purpose is to facilitate a living encounter with Jesus Christ in His church. This beautiful center is the home of the Society of Our Lady of the Most Holy Trinity, SOLT, a society made up of priests, consecrated persons, and laity. The Holy Mass is being broadcast for you, our GRN family of listeners, from the SOLT Chapel Monday through Friday at 7:30 a.m. Central Time. And it's just one more reason why the GRN is truly radio for your soul.
Welcome back to the Father. To join the conversation, call 877-757-9424. And please join us on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter.
All right, we are back, and this is our final segment of this week's Back to the Father here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Glad you're joining us, especially our new listeners in Tyler. If you're listening to KEES 1430 AM, we're so happy to welcome you to the network, and we are glad you're here. Also, thanks to Michael, who asked a good question about happiness and how Aristotle and Thomas may differ from the way that happiness is generally thought about today. Had some other people calling in, but Diane, doing triple duty back there, was talking to Michael and getting Dr. Cuddeback on the line. So if you want to call back in, we still have one more of Dr. Cuddeback's book called True Friendship, Where Virtue Becomes Happiness. Next caller gets one, 877-757-9424. You do have to go on the air with us, though. That's the only stipulation. And again, Zach Barton joining me in studio. Good to have you, Zach. Thanks for being on the program today. All right. Dr. John Cuddeback is the author of True Friendship, Where Virtue Becomes Happiness. Dr. Cuddeback, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dave. Great to be with you.
All right. Have you ever heard of a program on Catholic radio focused entirely on the Summa Theologia? This is what we do every week, and you're a perfect guest for it.
Well, sounds great.
Other than being the author of this book, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well,
are you a college professor?
Sure. Well, I've been blessed to be a philosophy professor for, I like to say, a quarter of a century. It sounds so much better than 25 years. Blessed to be married. I have 6 children, and I've loved teaching philosophy and working on my marriage and family all at the same time. I've taken a bit of what I do in the classroom and try to bring it to a broader audience at my LifeCraft, life-craft.org. Is where I'm trying to bring the insights of the ancients, especially by the light of natural reason, and applying them to things today. And, of course, friendship is one of the things that I particularly love to do that with.
Yeah. Tell us in particular, since this program kind of focuses on Thomas Aquinas, tell us about your interest in him. Of course, it's hard to talk about Thomas without talking about Aristotle and the Greek philosophers, but Thomas in particular, how has he helped you in your teaching and your own personal learning?
Oh, boy. I mean, Dave, I had a great Dominican professor who in his old age said, at this point, I am so honored to call myself a student of Thomas Aquinas, and if as an intellectual I just do a reasonably good job of doing that, I'll consider myself blessed. I say the exact same thing for myself. It's not as though it's about Thomas or understanding what he said. It's because he's such a great master in bringing our vision with his vision to see reality the way it is.
Yeah.
I just think he was such a gift to us in that way. That was God's special gift, that he can be such a great teacher and leader for us, and he's certainly been that for me.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons, I try not to hyper-focus on Aquinas because, he was a, human being like us and a sinner and a great saint, of course, but we call the show Back to the Father, and I think this ties in very well to the question that Michael asked. I don't know if you heard the question or not, but,
I think I caught it.
Yeah, so let me paraphrase what he said, and then why don't we go ahead and answer that question, because I think it ties in a lot to friendship as well, is basically Michael from San Antonio was asking, what does the notion or the idea of happiness, how does that differ in the light of what Aristotle or Thomas would define happiness as? How does that differ in the way that perhaps modern culture does? What would you say, Dr. Cuddeback?
Yeah, well, there's a lot right there. But if I take one step prior to that and kind of at the same time take that as our kind of entree into friendship, and let's put it this way: at the center of Aristotle's worldview is that when we understand human nature, we'll see that to be virtuous is to become yourself. It is what you're designed to be. So I like to say for Aristotle, becoming happy is not the reward you get for being virtuous. Being virtuous is constitutive of being happy. Being happy means to be thriving according to the natural plan. And so I mean, this, modernity in some ways just does not see that we have the gift of the plan of nature. Of course, we know that God has written that plan into us, the natural plan, and then further, there's the beautiful aspect of there's a supernatural plan that's further the fulfillment of that. So let's just put that supernatural one on the side burner for just a moment, but just focus on it's really in understanding virtue, in the challenge and the beauty of virtue, and that being our fulfillment. In doing that, we will be happy. Now let's just take that and quickly connect that to friendship. But at the center, I think, of our failure today to live friendship well is that we fail to see the challenge, the demand that friendship makes, because friendship is basically two people wanting to live together, to enjoy life together, to live life to the full together, to help one another become happy, to be happy together. The only way really to do that is to be growing in virtue together. And so that's the kind of the great rock on which friendship will either be founded or be broken. Can we center it on character and a true natural plan and call that God has given us?
Very nice. My guest is Dr. John Cuddeback. His book is called True Friendship, Where Virtue Becomes Happiness. Let me go to the phone lines because we got Bill calling in from Arlington, Texas. I want to get to him. Bill, do you have a question for Dr. Cuddeback or a comment about what we're talking about here with friendship?
Well, actually, I had a comment about what you were talking about earlier about complexity. And I had asked somebody what complexity was, and they gave me an interesting answer. They said complexity is made up of tiny little simplicities. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, get a magazine and a magnifying glass. I said, okay, open the magazine, find a picture of a face. Well, the face is a picture complex, correct? I was like, well, sure. If I wanted to draw it, it'd be very difficult on a pencil. He said, well, take the magnifying glass, put it over the picture, and what do you see? I said, well, I see a bunch of dots. He said, correct. Dots are a bunch of simplicities that make a complexity. So when I had heard you talk about the complexity earlier in the show, that kind of popped it in my mind. I just kind of want to get your viewpoint on how that would fit with what Thomas says about God.
That's an interesting question, and let me put you on hold, Bill. Thanks for the question, and that's a deep one. And Dr. Cuddeback, could you take what Bill said, especially when it's called about simplicity and complexity? Does that tie in to anything related to your book or friendship or something that you could maybe make that connection? I know that may be a tall order.
That might be a tall order. There's certainly, I think, a number of angles that one could take on that. And of course, I'm not privy to the earlier discussion, so I probably won't be able to do so well. But I mean, I'd certainly, I'm going to tie it into where my mind is going right now by just saying this. There are a lot of different little aspects that we got to get right in doing relationships with people. Human life is most of all in relationship. And relationships are as rich and complicated as is the call to live a good human life. There's so many ways that we have to discern of how to do that together. Well, there's lots of little parts to that, and we need to be working on all of them at the same time. To the extent that we start to get those right, then we're building a masterpiece. A friendship well lived, just like a life well lived, is a masterpiece that's brought together by a number of different things that can be rather simple in themselves, but brought together in order, being put, as it were, organized, especially on the principle of loving one another and wanting what's best for one another. You get the masterpiece of friendship. That's where my mind is going.
Yeah. Well, very good. And let's, because we're actually starting to run out of time, I want to make sure that we cut to the chase here. From a very practical standpoint, the mother who's having a hard time building a friendship with her daughter, or the husband with his wife, or how does your book, or what advice do you give on a very practical level of how one can build a better friendship using that virtue motto that you talk about?
Well, thanks for asking. I do give a lot of practical advice, and part of it is learning how to sort out that there are kind of different levels of friendship, different kinds of friendship relationships in our life. Couple things here. Start really quickly at more 10,000 feet, and then kind of come in a little closer. We need to begin by being intentional. Great friendships aren't going to happen by accident. We need to know what we're going for. We need to know how to go about it. We're not talking about this enough. We're not thinking about this enough. Honestly, I don't think it's being preached about. We need to start asking ourselves what constitutes a good friendship, and so how to do it. There's different levels. Right now I'm going to focus in on we need especially to be trying to go deeper with a couple people. 1, 2, 3. Obviously, if we're married, we start with our spouse. A special kind of relationship with children, that's a little bit different. But right now I'm going to focus on peers. Everybody needs to have 1, 2 people that they're really trying to go deeper with, and we need to be very discerning about that. And part of what I do is draw on the wisdom of St. Thomas Aquinas, and then also the great medieval theologian St. Alarid. They're incredibly practical. They give very specific advice for discerning. It's not about being judgmental. It's about being discerning. Look at the people in your life. With whom can I really try to go deeper? What in my own life is preventing me from being able to go deeper? And then also looking at the others. If with this person is someone that might be the case, I start to test it out. We start to really roll up our sleeves, and we begin, key practical concrete thing, start to hold one another accountable. Real friendship is lived daily, a key aspect of it in holding one another accountable. Do you have someone in your life that you can trust to tell you when you're not being you and to help you see that? That's the way to test. Do we have this deeper kind of friendship? You don't have that with everybody, but the deeper kind of friendship we're talking about, we need to be forging that and be very intentional about it with a few people. And just beginning by knowing that that's what we're trying to do is a big help.
Yeah, Dr.
I got another practical thing, but I want to stop right there because I'm talking a lot.
Yeah, no, that's all right. But we appreciate that. We got literally like a minute and a half. Zach, do you want to ask a real quick question? We'll have to have a real quick answer from you, Dr. Cutterback. I apologize.
All right, let's do it.
So, Dr. Cutterback, you're talking about in friendship, holding each other accountable. And at the very beginning of your answer, you also talked about having a certain aim. So, I would assume in the Christian tradition, your aim obviously ultimately would be heaven. But what could be some little goals that parents set with their kids of having a goal that they're both working towards to be able to build that friendship intentionally?
30 seconds.
Choose different key aspects of character. Is it chastity? Is it honesty? Is it patience? Is it courage? We need one another to visualize well what a good life is, and then to be helping one another, coming up with very concrete ways. Again, even kind of like a common examination of conscience. This is where we are in the trenches each day. Another quick one though, sharing in contemplation and prayer. Friends aren't just holding one another accountable; they're also turning to the highest things, ultimately to their relationship with Christ, and they're working on the spiritual life together. Are we working on the spiritual life together? That's what it's all about. But the gift of friendship is in God's plan to help us grow in our spiritual life. St. Albert says it's the major step towards growing in perfection, is that God wants you to be working on that with your friends.
Dr. Cutterback, we're going to have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for being on the program. Again, his book is called True Friendship, Where Virtue Becomes Happiness. Zach Barton, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Diane Xavier, thank you so much. I think the book shows that philosophy can be very practical in our everyday lives. All right, we'll see you next week for the next Back to the Father here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show, email Dave Palmer at grnonline.com.
Victory Investment Strategies is a sponsor of KATH 910 AM. They pray for continued blessings on all who make Catholic radio possible in North Texas. The unique programming is vital to our daily lives. Victory Investment Strategies is a full-service investment firm owned by Joel and Elizabeth Victory, members of St. Patrick Cathedral in Fort Worth. They offer a variety of products and will customize a plan to fit your individual needs. 866-810-6800. 866-810-6800. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC.
St. Francis of Assisi Parish in Frisco invites you to their 2021 Parish Lenten Mission, the week of Monday, March 8th through Saturday, March 13th. The mission will be held each evening from 6:30 to 9 p.m. in the main church